Good afternoon. You're listening to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska. This is a series of broadcasts which deal with the Prespa Agreement as cultural genocide of the Macedonian national identity towards the termination of an illegal treaty. A scholarly publication published in 2023 by Prof.d-r Igor Janev. Today we're going to embark on chapter 4 of this publication. And by the way, we've got permission, written permission from the author of this scholarly piece of work, a significant piece of work. And we thank Prof.d-r Igor for entrusting us to bring this document in the public's domain. Once again, welcome to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska. Chapter 4. The title of Chapter 4 is Human Rights Violations, Prespa Agreement and Ethnocide Hidden in its Norms. 4.1. The Prespa Agreement and administrative and legal limitations that affects second and third generation of human rights. The Prespa Agreement, and that is PA for short, as we may derive from the previous chapter in this publication, contains a number of so-called ID modifiers with the special aim to set restrictive administrative and legal limitations on the use of basic national terms: Macedonia, Macedonian, Macedonians, and all other terms derived from them that, under erga omnes principle embedded in the Prespa Agreement, supposed to belong after the PA registration in the United Nations exclusively to Greece. Those restricted terms with new imposed interpretation, in fact, artificially creates brand names is in quotations, for usage exclusively by Greece, and are banned to former Macedonian state, with the consent and a signature of the named country, Macedonia, the Fyrom, now under PA, North Macedonia. It seems that the Prespa Agreement was the first treaty in the history of international law where bilateral agreement extends its effects to third parties and even worldwide erga omnes not involved in the treaty or creation of the treaty. Hence, the Prespa Agreement changed the United Nations rules so that the terms Macedonia and Macedonians are now even in the UN organization, reserved only to Greeks and the Hellenic state, including related terminology, as an exclusive right. For instance, whenever some subject in the UN needs to address the second party being Macedonia, it must use the prefix North before the term Macedonia, or address always officially Republic of North Macedonia, or at least North Macedonia, Otherwise, the term Macedonia per se or alone represent exclusivity to Greece or Greek's geographical region and a Greek term. The same rule, a mandatory prefix before, applies for the term Macedonian or Macedonians as Greeks, only an exclusively reserved name category after the Prespa Treaty entered into force and registered in the UN in every fora or international organization globally. Even organizations external to the UN system, such as the UEFA, adopted such rule, and even their prescribed extensions relating to the abbreviations and acronyms in accordance with the Prespa Agreement. In the application of the erga omnes bans and restrictions, the government of the Republic of North Macedonia, hereafter RNM, recently introduced in domestic law restrictive bans on the usage of the term Macedonia alone, that is, without the mandatory prefix, including all its national and cultural derivations. With respect to these administrative bans extended even for private organizations and persons, in accordance with the PA, leader of the opposition Christian Mickovski from the V.1 party, in his statement condemned the anti-national measures. Quote, "This is crazy what we are going through as citizens. The only way to make it stop is that we defeat them in elections, which are coming very soon. They continue to commit crimes against the Macedonian people, and the humiliations won't stop, just as their crimes and corruption won't stop. Their fascist moves to erase the Macedonian nation, culture, and the word Macedonia, as well as our statehood, are continuing. We need to stand up against this injustice. We can't let it pass. The Macedonian people must unify and defeat this man," talking about Prime Minister Zaev and his accomplices. Namely, and that's the end of quotation that we were quoting Christian Mickovski, the leader of the V.1 party, which is in opposition currently. Namely, after several private civic associations and or companies revealed that they were denied a registration by the government because they used the word Macedonia in their names. The Minister of Justice Bojan Maricic in the government of Zaev announced that this is the new policy of the ministry, that all organizations which in some way have financial dealings with the government will need to use the imposed name North Macedonia in accordance with the PA, the Prespa Agreement, obligations. The opposition party V.1 and its president Christian Mickovski announced that this party will hold responsible the Prime Minister Zaev's regime officials who undermine Macedonian national interests. Mr. Mickovski said that this will include Justice Minister B. Maricic, who is now banning private organizations from registering if they use the term Macedonia in their names, and the organizers of the planned popular census. At this point, it should be noted that large number, and particularly the most important private civic associations and companies in the country are financed or supported by the government, and that practically all of them now need to change their name or terminology to satisfy the PA treaty. At the very beginning of the implementation of the general ban on terms Macedonia and Macedonians, the government of the de facto a new state of North Macedonia decided to rename all public institutions, including the Macedonian Academy of Sciences and Arts, MANU, The majority of the public institutions accepted commanding decisions or a decree of the government to rename themselves, omitting national designations, but that was not the case with the Macedonian Academy of Sciences and Arts, MANU. The president of MANU, academic Ljubčo Kocarev, I beg your pardon, explicitly rejected the decree for change of the name of Manu and stated, and we quote, "We are under the impression that many institutions and citizens are facing an ugly, unpleasant, repulsive, and fearsome environment because they choose to use the name Macedonia and adjectives related to it." End of quote. Kotsarev, an academic who explained the position of Manu in several other occasions and cases with similar statements against the revisions of national identity, indicating further strong opposition in the country against the oppressive government policy of nullifying national identity and cultural identification in accordance with the Prespa Accord demands. Among other arguments, he said, for instance, quote, "Article 7 of the PA not only does not guarantee, but in fact erases the Macedonian identity. Namely, this article determines the spatial framework for the use of the term Macedonia and Macedonian, or in other words, in the northern region of the state of Greece. There are no Slavic Macedonians because the term Macedonia in the state of Greece is already reserved not only for the area and the people in the northern region of Greece, but also for their features, including the Hellenic civilization, history, culture, and heritage of that region from antiquity to the present day." Thus, contrary to the historical facts, this agreement claims that in the region of Macedonia, in the state of Greece, from antiquity until today, lived only Hellenic but not Slavic Macedonians, starting from the fact that the action of the Slavic Macedonians in the state of Greece is part of the Macedonian identity. It appears that the Prespa Agreement, as I pointed out earlier, erases and does not guarantee the Macedonian identity. End of quote. From theoretical and practical point of view, emerged logically a question of the name of the people who actually now live in North Macedonia, if they could not anymore declare themselves as Macedonians, as well as the question, quotation, "What nation lived before the Prespa Treaty in this country?" End of quote. According to the Prespa Agreement, the citizens are formally defined Macedonians or Macedonian citizens of the Republic of North Macedonia in all ID documents, that is, for practical purposes. However, this vague formulation, combined with the ban on the term Macedonian and Macedonians erga omnes, suggests that nationality was intentionally omitted and restricted for that national community, so that any other state may use or interpret this term according to their policies, with the exception for obeying a rule that regulated the term Macedonian or Macedonians that now belongs only to Greece, i.e. have a new meaning worldwide in the form of a brand name. From the legal point of view, taking into consideration the long practice of national states' tradition to define their nationals in correspondence with their national or state names, one can make conclusions that people who are citizens in the North Macedonia are or were no North Macedonians. That is, not Macedonians after the accepted ban. This conclusion can also be derived from the provisions of the Prespa Agreement, which were the second party, officially admitted that there is no minorities, such as Macedonians of the second party state, i.e. in Greece. And this statement basically transcends relations with two parties in the agreement and could be generalized that, in fact, newly named states do not have any minorities outside of their own country. Inhabitants of the North Macedonia are nationless, not a national one, and regulatory history in the PA. Unlike other UN members, in accordance with the international law, to their minorities in Greece or elsewhere, since such minorities do not exist at all, that's the derivation of the PA. In conclusion, the Macedonian nation in North Macedonia do not and may not exist, and the obligation of the government of that country is that this condition be ensured with administrative policies, necessary regulations and law, and even proper education and cultural policies with respect to the regulated history by the PA. At this point of the implementation and interpretation of the Prespa Agreement, we found strong arguments to support a conclusion that this treaty actually implies or produces a nationless status and the effects cultural genocide, creating artificial regulated nation of non-Macedonians or North Macedonians. Our conclusion regarding the imposed ID is that the new name of the state, Republic of North Macedonia, is merely a new legal denomination, a permanent one, unlike provisional denomination imposed in the UN, that is the FIROM. Namely, there is a link between the state, the constitutional name, and the name of the nation and national culture, or even science based on national subjects, such as national history or language. A common container or natural common denominator is the original name of the nation, and hence this inherent name represents a link between the state's name and the name of the people, the nation, and its national culture. Provisions in the Prespa Agreement establishing common commission between two parties to a treaty with the task to regulate and create rules for mandatory history implementation were clear example of silent censorship introduction with international or rather external intervention in the areas of science and culture, including direct intervention in the media rights, even private ones. The Macedonian government, accepting the Prespa Agreement, actually agreed under foreign pressure that their nationality do not exist and officially sent additional diplomatic documents to Greece and the UN to clarify that irrational position. This point has been further elaborated on the web page of the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 2019, where we found the following statement, quotation, "The agreement defines only the citizenship of the neighbor's citizens, which is the legal bond between the citizen and the state. Moreover, FIROM formally confirmed Greece through the 16 of the 1st 2019 Memorandum of Understanding, which is legally binding on FIROM, that the use of the term nationality in the English version of the Prespa Agreement refers only to citizenship." The answer to the question, do we recognize the Macedonian nation or Macedonian language in the Prespa Agreement, reads, quotation, "The agreement does not recognize Macedonian people or Macedonian nation. Same policy for self-non-recognition officially North Macedonian government is trying to impose in internal public order and their policies. It is our understanding that this imposition of denial of national identity is in violation of basic human rights to possess or have a nationality and to self-determination of that national identity and the right to national identity. Furthermore, the Prespa Agreement with specific restrictive interpretation denies that Macedonian nation existed even before the conclusion of PA, so that all sources before the PA 2018 need to interpret these people as North Macedonian, contrary to the common recent historical facts known from the period of Yugoslavia and before, where in all documents they were referred to as Macedonians. This new ID, redefinitions for Macedonians nowadays, were already accepted in many fora and media worldwide. And for instance, English Wikipedia speaks now about North Macedonia in the period of former Yugoslavia, which is a blatant nonsense and a lie. As mentioned above, long before establishing the state of Macedonia as a national group possesses, and preserves their national identity as Macedonian people. It's well-known fact that they were recognized even by the Serbian king in the old Yugoslavia in the 20th century, who, as the monarch, fought against the Macedonian separatism, so that any attempt to fabricate or regulate history such as that they were Tito's creation, as suggested, represent flagrant politically motivated manipulation and prohibited act of damnatio memoriae. The whole idea that an international treaty could retroactively regulate past facts and history as per se, apparently logically unsound and legally wrongful. In our examination of human rights violations contained in the Prespa Agreement, we found particularly useful the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, adopted by the UN General Assembly on the 13th of September 2007. In this document, the term nationality is not related only to citizenship, but more comprehensively to its original sociological context of the collective international human rights that people possess even out scope of its legal relation to any particular state, says Professor Dr. Igor Janev. In the preamble of this document, it states, quotation, bearing in mind that nothing in this declaration may be used to deny any peoples their right of self-determination, exercised in conformity with international law, convinced that the recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples in this declaration will enhance harmonious and cooperative relations between the state and the indigenous peoples, based on the principles of justice, democracy, respect for human rights, non-discrimination, and good faith. Encouraging states to comply with and effectively implement all their obligations as they apply to indigenous peoples under international instruments, in particular those related to human rights, in consultation and cooperation with the people concerned. Recognizing and reaffirming that indigenous individuals are entitled without discrimination to all human rights recognized in international law, and that indigenous peoples possess collective rights which are indispensable for their existence, well-being, and internal development as peoples. Recognizing that the situation of indigenous peoples varies from region to region and from country to country, and that the significance of national and regional particularities and various historical and cultural backgrounds should be taken into consideration. End of quote. May I, at this juncture, remind you that you are listening to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska YouTube channel. And the series, which we started not long ago, is the Prespa Agreement as Cultural Genocide of the Macedonian National Identity, towards the termination of an illegal treaty, a scholarly publication by Professor Dr. Igor Janev, an expert on international law and constitutional law, who's the author of many books. The publication was published in 2023. Recognizing that the situation of indigenous peoples varies from region to region and from country to country, and that the significance of national and regional particularities and various historical and cultural backgrounds should be taken into consideration. End of quote. Here, Professor Dr. Igor Janev was citing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, adopted by the UN General Assembly on the 13th of September 2007 document. This wording, says Professor Dr. Igor Janev, in the preamble, as we may derive at this point, indicate that nationality should be interpreted as a broad international category and concept independent from the state, in such manner that indigenous peoples may possess this legal quality capacity based on the right of self-determination and group right, where there is an international obligation of state or states to take into consideration and respect the national or regional particularities and various historical and cultural backgrounds of these people. Clearly, this United Nations document reaffirms simple fact that people, even in the pre-state status or conditions prior to the state emergence formation, could form ethnic national communities, and that such ethnic or primitive pre-national groups have the rights that are protected by international law outside of the state institution and its local power or jurisdiction. In Article 2, it is provided that, quotation, indigenous peoples and individuals are free and equal to all other peoples and individuals and have the right to be free from any kind of discrimination in the exercise of their rights, in particular, that are based on their indigenous origin or identity, end of quote. And Article 3 stipulates that, quotation, indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. End of quote. To clarify the character of the term nationality, we quote here the Article 4 and Article 5 that confirm the existence of necessary level of autonomy from the state or the authority with respect to that popular or national capacity by creating collective right vis-a-vis a state that is obligations to respect the independent nature of that national collective international right. Quotation, indigenous peoples, in exercising their right to self-determination, have the right to autonomy or self-government in matters relating to their internal and local affairs, as well as ways and means for financing their autonomous functions. End of quote. Article 4. Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and strengthen their distinct political, legal, economic, social, and cultural institutions while retaining their right to participate fully, if they so choose, in the political, economic, social, and cultural life of the state. Article 5, end of quote. For the purposes of our research, says Professor Dr. Igor Janev, we should emphasize that everything that is legally applicable in the cited UN Declaration on Indigenous People may also be applicable to all other peoples, groups, or nations without prejudice regarding different level of development. Indigenous rights, norms, and principles constitute also a body or set of general collective ethnic national rights, norms, and principles that concern all human beings, without prejudice or dependency to their relation or form or link vis-a-vis a state. Namely, a right to nationality is a universal human right, and by the spirit of the Declaration, not dependent on the mere status of authority or formal link to the state or pre-state authority. In that broader legal context, we should understand the provisions of Article 6 regarding nationality. Quotation, every indigenous individual has the right to a nationality. End of quote. This provision is related apparently to the citizenship that needs to be provided by the state as primary objective of this norm. But in the spirit of this declaration, it goes beyond the mere link between the inhabitants and the state where they belong, and should be interpreted literally as the right to create, form, and belong to the certain independent ethnic nation, that is, as a right to collectively self-determine national group or ethnic national community. The main purpose of this declaration was in fact to prohibit ethnocide or cultural genocide by fostering the right to nationality and national or ethnic culture and identity, including protection of cultural, ethnic, and national rights. A right to national culture is particularly regulated in Article 8. It provides the following rights and obligations of states to people living in their territorial jurisdiction and needed to be protected from authorities or other groups. 1. Quotation 1. Indigenous peoples and individuals have the right not to be subjected to forced assimilation or destruction of their culture. 2. States shall provide effective mechanisms for the prevention of and redress for A. Any action which has the aim or effect of depriving them of their integrity as distinct peoples or of their cultural values or ethnic identities. B. Any action which has the aim or effect of dispossessing them of their lands, territories, and resources. C. Any form of forced population transfer which has the aim or effect of violating or undermining any of their rights. D. Any form of forced assimilation or integration. E. Any form of propaganda designed to promote or incite racial or ethnic discrimination directed against them. End of quote. As we may conclude from these provisions, all or most of these rights concerns protection of national culture, nationality, and ethnic rights relating to distinct collective nationality and against the possible cultural genocide as a special form of genocide based on terminations of cultural and spiritual identity of ethnic national groups. Furthermore, in the next Article 9 of the Declaration, National Ethnic Rights as collective concept of protection, I expressly denoted, quotation, indigenous peoples and individuals have the right to belong to an indigenous community or nation in accordance with the traditions and customs of the community or nation concerned. No discrimination of any kind may arise from the exercise of such a right. End of quotation. We note that indigenous people may form a nation, and all rights related to them, including self-determination and identity, could be summarized as the right to nationality and parallel obligation of a state, not to impede or restrict that collective basic right. Here, indigenous community may essentially be described as a nation or indigenous peoples that form a nation, and that community is subject of protection and rights or freedoms with autonomy in accordance with the traditions of a nation. For a state or international community, there is no obligation to respect cultural autonomy and ethnic or national identity of a national group by avoiding interference and restrictions of any kind with respect to that identity and autonomy. For the protection against ethnocide or cultural genocide, this declaration contains a comprehensive list of states' obligations and related responsibilities. In Article 11, it is provided that, quotation, 1. Indigenous peoples have the right to practice and revitalize their cultural traditions and customs. This includes the right to maintain, protect, and develop the past, present, and future manifestations of their cultures, such as archaeological and historical sites, artifacts, designs, ceremonies, technologies, and visual and performing arts and literature. 2. States shall provide redress through effective mechanisms, which may include restitution developed in conjunction with indigenous peoples with respect to their cultural, intellectual, religious, and spiritual property taken without their free, prior, and informed consent or in violation of their laws, traditions, and customs. End of quote. Among other rights or duties relevant for our research, says Professor Igor Janev, we found particularly interested media-related rights, since the Prespa Agreement regulates those rights too in Macedonia in an apparently illegal way. In Article 16 of the Declaration, it is stated, for instance, quotation, 1, indigenous peoples have the right to establish their own media in their own languages and to have access to all forms of non-indigenous media without discrimination. 2, states shall take effective measures to ensure that state-owned media duly reflect indigenous cultural diversity. States without prejudice to ensuring full freedom of expression should encourage privately owned media to adequately reflect indigenous cultural diversity. End of quote. This particular article of declaration reveals to us another form of blatant violations relating to human rights and cultural identity regarding the Prespa Agreement. Namely, the Prespa Agreement not only denies a nationality to a certain community and the right to collective nationality, but it appears to deny a list of fundamental rights all the way, even to the level of basic freedom of expression. Freedom, right of opinion, and of free thought as the worldwide recognized basic human rights of Jus Cogens character. Declaration presented here merely reflects the Jus Cogens norms that impose obligations on states and international authorities to respect those basic freedoms and protect them, not just on individual level, but collective level as well. The declaration itself invoked International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, particularly provisions in them relating to self-government and or self-determination. Also, the declaration recalled the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and that document, in the spirit of the new interpretation of the declaration's nationality, appears to be somewhat amended, particularly with the collective inherent right to nationality as a broader concept of basic right than the original right to a citizenship as individual concept embedded in the content of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In that new light of Declaration on Indigenous Rights, provisions in the Prespa Agreement violated Articles 18 and 19 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and corresponding provisions in the International Covenants on Human Rights related to self-determination. From a legal point of view, the right to self-determination represents, in essence, a right to identity, where identity is defined by individual or collective relation to national or ethnic community as capacity for relational freedom of self-identification within the group, or vis-a-vis a group community authority. In this context, the right to identify, the right to identity means right to a national identity, or at least ethnic, one growing to become national identity, where a group of people may found some common roots or social strong grounds that bind them as close community based on the same history and or language, and recognized by the community or the group. The right to self-determination is therefore the right to free or national determination or right to independent national identity as collective self-identification as a group and by the group, that is, vis-a-vis other groups or authority. Every ethnic group in historical context shows natural tendency to expand its influence and become integrated national community with more social power and hence more rights. For this reason, the right to self-determination primarily relates to the right to national identity as recognized national interests or general right to nationality, eventually entailing more corresponding obligations of international or state character. In modern times, modern states were born in the late 18th and 19th century, were smaller social groups united into larger national communities ready to form the non-feudal integrated industrial states, usually after the process of industrial revolutions and emergence of strong and expanding financial industrial elites or social classes. Only through the emergence of sovereign state, national communities could acquire the full recognition and protection of their independent rights and interests, and pursue peaceful development to the full extent of collective or national potentials and their self-fulfillment. Hence, in modern relations emerged a duty of, and for modern international community, of states to recognize and respect the national rights, both collective and states' empowerment or entitlements, irrespectively from the accomplished level of development of states' authority or form and level of organized communities. In that light, the Declaration of Indigenous Rights, expanded set of original individual human rights known in the Declaration on Human Rights and mentioned covenants, by giving broader meaning to terminology of national rights and the right to self-determination as national self-determination of communities, as nations, their individuals and nation states. According to this declaration from 2007, it is contrary to the international law to practice cultural assimilation or any act of nullification or degradation of the original cultural or ethnic identity chosen by the people or nation themselves. Thus, any attempt to modify or disrespect the original national or ethnic identity represent a flagrant violation of basic human rights. For instance, any attempt to negotiate or to rewrite history by negotiations or associate by government acts or decisions any language of one nation to another one, or intervene in another way in any such cultural or educational areas by an external act, such as the treaty or even the UN or the EU resolution, should be interpreted as blatant violation of international human rights law. In this context, we should again reiterate that the name of the state represents a national name, subject to self-determination and national self-identification, both as a human right to nationality and sovereign right of the state. Article 15 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights provide for individual right to nationality, that is, as citizenship, whereas the Declaration on Indigenous Rights provides for the collective right to nationality as codification of emerging jus cogens norms protecting that collective people's right. It appears from that concept that the collective rights are not confronted or entirely different category of rights vis-a-vis individual rights, but rather complementary sorts or versions of rights. In the UN summary related to the adoption of that declaration, collective rights, where the collective rights were expressly addressed, stating, quotation, the declaration addresses both individual and collective rights, cultural rights, and identity, rights to education, health, employment, language, and others. It outlaws discrimination against indigenous peoples and promotes their full and effective participation in all matters that concern them. It also ensures their right to remain distinct and to pursue their own priorities in economic, social, and cultural development. The declaration explicitly encourages harmonious and cooperative relations between states and indigenous peoples. End of quote. These collective rights, as jus cogens norms of the general character, are applicable to all nations or ethnic groups, regardless of their status or stage of development. Remarkably, in the discussed new concept of law above, says Prof.d-r Igor Janev, the individual rights seems to represent a component part of the collective rights, and it appears that in many cases, collective rights violations may be condemned or prosecuted as violations of individual rights. Regardless of the interpretation, the Prespa Agreement represents a clear example of violation for both human collective rights and sovereign rights of a state, including the state's membership rights in the system of international organized community, UN and other organizations and fora related to the UN organization. In the UNESCO Mexico City Declaration on Cultural Policies from 1982, particular section deals with the cultural identity. These two words, cultural identity, are in quotations. It was agreed or provided for that, quotation, 1, every culture represents a unique and irreplaceable body of values, since each people's traditions and forms of expression are its most effective means of demonstrating its presence in the world. 2, the assertion of cultural identity therefore contributes to the liberation of peoples. Conversely, any form of domination constitutes a denial or an impairment of that identity. 3, cultural identity is a treasure that vitalizes mankind's possibilities of self-fulfillment by moving every people and every group to seek nurture and nurture in its past, to welcome contributions from outside that are compatible with its own characteristics, and so to continue the process of its own creation. 4, all cultures form part of the common heritage of mankind. The cultural identity of a people is renewed and enriched through contact with the traditions and values of others. Culture is dialogue, the exchange of ideas and experience, and the appreciations of other values and traditions. It withers and dies in isolation. 5, the universal cannot be postulated in the abstract by any single culture. It emerges from the experience of all of the world's peoples as each affirms its own identity. Cultural identity and cultural diversity are inseparable. 6, special characteristics do not hinder, but rather enrich the communion of the universal values that unite peoples. Hence, the recognition of the presence of a variety of cultural identities, wherever various traditions exist side by side, constitutes the very essence of cultural pluralism. 7, the international community considers it its duty to ensure that the cultural identity of each people is preserved and protected. 8, all of these points to the need for cultural policies that will protect, stimulate, and enrich each people's identity and cultural heritage, and establish absolute respect for and appreciation of cultural minorities and the other cultures of the world. The neglect or destruction of the culture of any group is a loss to mankind as a whole. 9, The equality and dignity of all cultures must be recognized, as must the right of each people and cultural community to affirm and preserve its cultural identity and have it respected by others. End of quote. You are listening to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska, and we are sharing with you publicly Chapter 4 of the publication titled The Prespa Agreement as Cultural Genocide of the Macedonian National Identity Towards the Termination of an Illegal Treaty, a scholarly body of work whose author is Prof.d-r Igor Janev. Dr. Igor Janev says, in conclusion, the cultural identity that primary in this context means national cultural identity is inviolable and in fact matter of reserved sovereign domestic jurisdiction. Every nation possesses unlimited freedom on the interpretation of its own history and traditions. No one is entitled to interpret culture or interfere with cultural beliefs of other nations. In the section on cultural heritage, it was provided that, paragraph 23, quotation, paragraph 23, the cultural heritage of a people includes the works of its artists, architects, musicians, writers, and scientists, and also the work of anonymous artists, expressions of the people's spirituality, and the body of values which give meaning to life. It includes both tangible and intangible works through which the creativity of those people finds expression, languages, rites as in R-I-T-E-S, beliefs, historic places and monuments, literature, works of art, archives, and libraries. 24. Every people, therefore, has a right and a duty to defend and preserve its cultural heritage, since societies recognize themselves through the values in which they find a source of creative inspiration. And paragraph 5, the cultural heritage has frequently suffered damage or destruction as a result of thoughtlessness, as well as of the process of urbanization, industrialization, and technological penetration. But even more intolerable is the damage caused to the cultural heritage by colonialism, armed conflict, foreign occupation, and the imposition of alien values. All these have the effect of severing a people's links with and obliterating the memory of its past. Preservation and appreciation of its cultural heritage therefore enable a people to defend its sovereignty and independence, and hence affirm and promote its cultural identity. Paragraph 26, the resolution to their countries of origin of works, the restitution to their countries of origin of works illicitly removed from them is a basic principle of cultural relations between peoples. Existing international instruments, agreements, and resolutions could be strengthened to increase their effectiveness in this respect. End of quote. Furthermore, freedom of scientific and cultural creation or artistic innovations and development are inviolable and protected. Paragraph 7. The flowering of culture is inseparable both from the independence of peoples and from individual freedom. Freedom of opinion and expression is essential for the creative activities of artists and intellectuals alike. Paragraph 8, social and cultural conditions must be established which will facilitate, stimulate, and guarantee artistic and intellectual creation without political, ideological, economic, or social discrimination. Paragraph 29, the development and promotion of art education imply not only the formulation of specific programs designed to foster artistic appreciation and support groups or institutions engaged in creation and dissemination, but also the encouragement of activities that will stimulate public awareness of the social importance of art and intellectual creation. Same rights relating to culture and identity could be found in the following sections. Paragraph 37. The modern communication media should facilitate objective information on cultural trends in the various countries without detriment to the freedom of creativity and cultural identity of nations. Paragraph 38. The technological progress of the last few years has led to the expansion of cultural industries. Whatever their mode of organization, these industries play an important role in the distribution of cultural goods. However, in their international activities, they often disregard the traditional values of society and kindle hopes and aspirations which are not in keeping with the actual needs of its development. Furthermore, the absence of national cultural industries may, particularly in developing countries, constitute a source of cultural dependence and give rise to alienation. Paragraph 39. It is consequently essential to encourage the establishment of cultural industries in countries where they do not exist, through bilateral and multilateral assistance programs, always ensuring that the production and distribution of cultural goods is in keeping with the integrated development of each society. Paragraph 40. The modern communication media are now fulfilling a basic role in education and the spreading of culture. Society, therefore, has to find ways and means of using new production and communication technologies to achieve genuine individual and collective development and to promote the independence of nations by preserving their sovereignty and strengthening peace in the world. End of quote. These paragraphs apparently indicate that irrespective of factual truth, every nation has a right to self-identification and non-interference from others in their beliefs or historical interpretations and traditions. Others have a duty to respect those beliefs, even though they may not agree regarding such beliefs or stands. Therefore, from different historical stands or beliefs, no international dispute could arise or be generated, particularly not a difference that could require degradation of the membership status on any one member state in the United Nations, as was the Macedonian case. As for obligations of nations to recognize other cultures and diversity, the Declaration provides in paragraph 46, quotation, international cultural cooperation must be based on respect for cultural identity, recognition of the dignity and value of all cultures, national independence and sovereignty, and non-intervention. Consequently, in cooperative relations between nations, all forms of subordination or the replacement of one culture by another should be avoided. It is also essential to rebalance cultural interchange and cooperation in order that the less known cultures, particularly those of certain developing countries, may be more broadly disseminated in all countries. End of quote. As we may derive from this subsection of the Declaration, other countries may not intervene in affairs of cultural national character or domestic and sovereign identity matters. These vital elements related to cultural or national identity remain in sovereign, inviolable domestic jurisdiction. Stricto sensu. These identity elements, including national culture, history, language, and so on, may only be recognized by others, including diversities in beliefs, and as inalienable or sovereign matters not in any manner subjected to negotiations or external redefinition or imposition or interference. In the case of the Prespa Agreement domestic performance, where the Macedonian Prime Minister introduced its restrictive implementation, the former minister and member of parliament, Dr.d-r Mizrahi from the major opposition party IV.1 reacted with a call for resignation of the prime minister or his impeachment under accusation of human rights violations. For instance, she said that The Prime Minister Zaev had no mandate to erase history and write it as he possesses, end of quote. After the Macedonian Academy of Science and Arts rejected the renaming itself as academic institution according to the Prespa Treaty, its present President, I beg your pardon, Ljupčo Kočarev, strongly condemned the policy of Zaev, comparing Prime Minister Zaev with the Turkish Sultan. Kočarev said that since the Sultan in 1903 until recently, no one else had banned the name of Macedonia, and added that the Macedonian name, language, culture, identity, history, national consciousness, and self-identity are a sovereign, inalienable, universal right of the Macedonian people. Paradoxically and sadly, we have lost some of these rights in the search for the ancient past, while it seems that we will soon lose all those rights in the name of a European future. End of quote. It should be mentioned at this point that after completion of the Prespa Agreement in 2019 and its registration in the United Nations, the Bulgarian government have promptly activated a new dispute on the problem of identity that now has to be solved if Macedonian state, now the Republic of North Macedonia, want to become a EU member. Namely, the Macedonian Prime Minister Zaev with the Prime Minister of Bulgaria, B. Borisov, concluded a treaty in 2017 with subject matter covering Macedonian identity. In this treaty of friendship, so-called friendship, good neighborliness and cooperation between the two countries, in similar way, like with Greece, Macedonia naively admitted that there was a dispute with Bulgaria over national Macedonian history and language, where the Bulgarians claimed that these ID elements belong to them, and that until this so-called dispute is solved, Bulgaria will not lift the policy of veto blockade on the Macedonian accession to EU. The president of MANU reacted with respect to this Bulgarian blockade, placed as condition even before obtaining a date for beginning of the negotiations with EU, and revealed assimilation Bulgarian strategies and policies against Macedonia. Quotation, unfortunately, today we are faced with unprincipled blackmail and threats and unscientific arguments, a preposterous claim that the Macedonian identity and the Macedonian language have Bulgarian roots, an observed request for Macedonia to define its national genesis as required by a neighboring country, end of quote. And he also added, quote, after 75 years of statehood of Macedonia, the old appetites of some of our neighbors, new questions, and all wounds have opened. They are attacking what is most sacred to us. We are witnessing that some agreements are being made behind the back of the Macedonian people, end of quote. In a separate statement, Kočarev specifically addressed the problem of the language, where Bulgaria claims that Macedonian language is in fact a form of Bulgarian language, and that North Macedonia must accept that as a condition for the solution of the dispute, and thus deblockade its accession to the EU, and stated the following remark, quotation, languages are formed over a long period of time and over a broad space, and unlike nation states, which have a specific time of establishment and clearly defined sovereignty, languages are complex, adaptable, and are established over hundreds of years, long before the nation states, end of quote. Kočarev in his column shoots back at the demands from Bulgaria, which wants Macedonia to declare the Macedonian language as a newly minted invention codified in 1944, as if that is the year the language was created by the Bulgarian language, from the Bulgarian language. Kočarev warns that Bulgaria will want the dialects of the Macedonian languages spoken in Albania, for example, to be declared as dialects of the Bulgarian language, end of quote. From a political point of view, it needs to be observed that the Macedonian opposition party, VMRO-DPMNE, would not be aware of ethnocide or elements of cultural genocide related to the Prespa Agreement, if there were no new political conditions or similar type as Greek ones coming from Bulgaria. The opposition actually learned about the illegality of the Prespa Agreement only after the country was subjected to blackmailing for entrance or application to the EU by Bulgaria. Namely, the political elite in Macedonia silently already sold the state's name for promises of EU future, but conditionally didn't finish with the PA and continued even more directly with an open Bulgarian blackmail that was unbearable. In conclusion, the Prespa Agreement indeed nullified national identity. And at that point, the Bulgarian strategists saw a chance to fulfill a national gap or lost identity with the implementation of their own national identity on so-called North Macedonians, who actually never existed as such people in the history. That is, invented North Macedonians represent non-existing artificial nation. Beside the MANU, M-A-N-U, the leadership of the major opposition party, V.1 appears to be now more motivated to reconsider the value and validity of the Prespa Agreement and the possibilities of its change or annulment termination. Among a set of international administrative and legal issues created by the implementation of the PA, a special problem emerged in issuing new personal ID cards that are mandatory IDs for all adult persons in the population over the age of 18, namely the Albanian ethnic population and their political representatives refused to be named in the new ID cards as national Macedonians or North Macedonians, and not even as the citizens of the Republic of North Macedonia. They requested to be designated as a nationality in formal nationality section in the IDs as Albanians, only nationality Albanian. That problem was the legacy after the Ohrid Framework Agreement that was incorporated into the preamble of the Prespa Agreement as its constituent part under explicit request of all Albanian parties in the Macedonian parliament in order to vote for the PA ratification and consequent constitutional amendments. Similar designation for Macedonians as nationality was not possible to embed in ID documents due to the legal obligations stemming from the Prespa Agreement. After a few months of debate over the nationality section in the personal IDs in the Macedonian parliament, the government finally decided not to fulfill the nationality graph in case of ethnic Macedonians, not to include, decided not to fulfill or include nationality graph in case of ethnic Macedonians at all. Instead of passing a law in the parliament that was required by the constitution, Zaev's government enacted a bylaw regulation issued by the Ministry of Internal Affairs for new ID cards with a new name for the state and empty space for Macedonians only in the section or the graph related no nationality. At the beginning of all that process, Prime Minister Zaev insisted on citizenship formula of all citizens. After the apparent statement in the parliament, the president of North Macedonia, S. Pendarovski, addressed the issue and stated that there should be no designation for nationality in ID cards at all. When it became unavoidable under the request from the Albanian political parties that nationality must retain in the new IDs, Pendarovski commented, quote, "Personally, I do not agree, but if they vote in this way, I will sign the decree, although I do not agree that this information should be included on the identity cards," end of quote. At the end of the process, in the Macedonian parliament, decision on that issue was unsuccessful due to the filibustering with thousands of amendments by the opposition, mainly from political party, the left. Namely, that law on IDs could not pass without the national designation for Macedonians in the IDs. All this mess related the blockade and filibustering in the parliament was actually a result of initial empty promises launched by SDSM propaganda regarding the alleged preservation of national identity in the new changed state's name and provisions incorporated by in the PA. Zaev's SDSM party as a ruling party in the government and in the Macedonian parliament in the period of 2018 to 2019, in order to avoid national dissatisfaction or resistance, actually promised the people that constitutional changes in January 2019 would not affect a national identity and that identity will not change under the PA and adoption of amendments related to the PA. In 2021, the SDSM could not propose a logical solution for IDs with the new national identity, that is, with designation North Macedonians, since that would only prove that Zaev's SDSM government lied to the Macedonian people about the PA's changes for, in fact, almost 3 years. That is, providing that nationality was indeed changed with the PA at the beginning of 2018 signing of the PA. In the absence of a solution for ID cards, since neither Macedonians as an ID solution nor transformed North Macedonians could pass the process in the parliament and become the law, Zaev's government decided to create a bylaw contrary to the constitutional requirements, only to solve the problems of thousands of people left without personal IDs. The new ID cards were, among other usages, applications of a general character, a precondition for early local election that was scheduled to be held in Macedonia on the 17th of October 2021, since the IDs are necessary documents in the voting process in Macedonia and all other administrative processes as well. From the political angle, a case with the IDs that proved to be fundamentally unsolvable only demonstrated that Zaev's government intentionally deceived the Macedonian people when spreading propaganda in favor of the PA, that national identity will not be modified or changed with the agreement, and required constitutional changes in accordance with that treaty. Although apparently the PA contained ID modifiers, as Greeks repeated many times. Two similar political parties in the Macedonian opposition bloc, the political party of the lefts and the political party Voice for Macedonia, promised a termination of the Prespa Agreement if they win in early general elections, expected to be in early 2022. On the other hand, we noted that with respect to this treaty, the US President Joseph Biden warned all parties and individuals not to attack on or to nullify the Ohrid and Prespa agreements to avoid US sanctions. Wow. Among national academic institutions, the MANU was most interested for not changing its name, since after the required modification, the abbreviated name of that institution would possibly be ANUSM for most members of the academic community, and MANU, a rude, vulgar, repulsive, and dishonorable denomination. One of the worst aspects of the PA was provision that set of denominations, ID modifiers, should be implemented retroactively, changing even the actual facts related to the statehood of the country. Well, that was chapter 4.1 in its entirety. It's been certainly a long rendition of this document. We will continue chapter 4.2 in the next broadcast, which will be done separately very soon, of course. Just to remind everyone, you've been listening to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska, and the body of work, the scholarly body of work by Prof.d-r Igor Janev, titled The Prespa Agreement as Cultural Genocide of the Macedonian National Identity towards the Termination of an Illegal Treaty. I am certainly hopeful that you've been able to follow the contents of chapter 4.1, because it has been quite detailed and giving all the important aspects as they relate to the United Nations, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and conventions, and many other documents which are actually significant. In this case, the case of the Prespa Agreement between Macedonia and the Hellenic state. So thank you indeed for your patience, for your attention. Feel free to make any comments or ask questions, and we shall endeavor to have them responded to. Thank you very much indeed. I'll see you soon.